Hello, welcome to Wednesday's video. So this would be April 22nd, right? Whew, a little cold out here. All right, today we're looking at Roman numeral 5 in the slides called the build-up for invasion. After North Africa and the invasion of Italy and Sicily and then Italy, as soon as those invasions were over, and the Italian mainland is, slowly being fought over for the entire summer of, or spring of 1944. I talked about this last week. All the landing craft, all the key generals, all the resources that carried out all those landings immediately sailed west out of the Mediterranean Sea and went north. And they all headed for England. England became the planning zone for what becomes known as the D-Day invasion, the Normandy invasion. Operation Overlord, they call it. And thousands and thousands of American and Canadian troops, Australian and New Zealand troops, anybody who isn't already deployed fighting the Japanese, anybody that isn't already fighting in Italy, they're pretty much headed for England. Ships after ship after ship, convoy after convoy, headed for England. And they begin setting up in bases all over England. There are several people I want to mention. One of them is Mr. Sneath, who you've heard me talk about before, who is a Heartland person. Mr. Sneath told me that his unit got to England and unloaded, and they were a quartermaster unit, and as soon as so their job was to account for all the supply boxes and load all supply boxes into a ship, and then when the ship lands, they were supposed to unload all the supply boxes and account for everything and then issue supplies out to people. Well, once he got to England, they grabbed about half of his unit, about 500 men, and said, actually, we're going to retrain you to do a different job when you hit the beach. Instead of counting supplies and making sure that supplies get issued, we're going to make you beach demolition engineers. You're going to blow stuff up on the beach. Well, that's not what he signed up for, but that's what he ended up doing. And so in this little English town, he and another soldier were sent to live at this English woman's house. All the soldiers were sent, 3 or 4 of them at a time, to go live in all the English people's homes in this town. And they were kind of like their caretakers. And he remembers this English lady. After a whole day of training, they would come home and their boots would be all muddy and they would be starving, and they would take off all their muddy stuff at the door so they wouldn't make her house a mess. And they'd sit down and she'd feed them. And then in the morning when they woke up, all of what he remembered was his boots had always been scrubbed clean. And he never forgot her. She was like his second mom, is what he always used to tell me. Anyway, he remembered her name, he remembered the address to the house, he remembered everything. I probably have it written down somewhere. Anyway, she was more than happy to do these things because all of her sons were serving in the British Army somewhere else in the world. But all over England, every field turned into a giant supply dump. If you just randomly were, bicycling through England, you'd see fields full of brand new tanks, fields full of brand new airplanes, jeeps, fields full of ammunition all stacked up. It was everywhere. And the training and stuff went on over and over and over. If you've ever seen episode 1 of Band of Brothers, where they're training in England, if I can find a little clip and attach it, I will, because it's pretty funny. How they take over England and use it as a training zone, and the people of England just kind of put up with it. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Anyway, so the whole English countryside is used as training and assembly area. These troops are all there practicing, but nobody knows where the landing's going to be, and nobody knows when it's going to happen, except for Eisenhower and his staff. That's it. General Patton is there, but because of his bad behavior in Sicily, he is put in charge of, I've talked about this before, a fake army known as the Ghost Army to the Americans. To the Germans, they thought it was a real army. I'll try to put the link for the Ghost Army on Netflix on the Google Classroom, so you can check it out. But go to Netflix, look for a ghost army, and it's pretty interesting what they do, messing with the Germans. So the plan, when it's all put together, is that first they were planning for May, then based on weather they said, no, let's go in June, and the plan is for June 5th. Now, as we know, D-Day is June 6th, but the plan was for June 5th. And it was going to be a massive operation all across the south and east coasts of England. Ships are piling up and stacking up as they begin to load them all for this invasion. Thousands of ships, thousands of planes, hundreds of thousands of men, thousands of pieces of equipment. So anyway, it's called Operation Overlord, and it's set to go off at a point in time which will be known as Decision Day, which is how it gets the name D-Day. On Decision Day, that is when this chain of events will start going. It's basically a chain of events that you can't really turn off. On day 1, all these troops will land. On day 2, all these troops will land. On day 3, so it's like clockwork. It's all got to happen. You can't stop it once it gets going. And so they planned it for June 5th. Operation Overlord had 5 landing beaches, and each one of these beaches was about 2 miles wide. So overall about 10 miles. And if you actually look where they landed, it's about a 15-mile stretch of French coastline on the Normandy coast. So the whole trick was get the Germans to believe you're going to invade at a spot called Calais, which is, on a really good day, you could stand on the English cliffs of Dover, and with strong binoculars, you could see Calais. That's how close it was. Something like 20 miles. Instead, they were going to invade in Normandy, which is further away, but the beaches are nicer. They're more gradual beach, more flat beach, easier for vehicles to come out of the water. I was there 2 summers ago, and I can confirm that. It's a very, very flat beach. Anyway, so there were going to be 2 American beaches. Utah Beach will be all the way on the left, or the west, and then Omaha Beach. And then there's a river that dumps into the English Channel. And then there's going to be an English beach, and then a Canadian beach, and then another English beach. And those beaches are Gold, Sword, and Juno. And so it is a Allied invasion for sure. You've got the Americans, the British, the Canadians, the Free French in the first waves. And then in second waves, you've even got the remainder of Polish troops coming in. You've got Australian and New Zealand troops coming in. It's just a multinational invasion. Anyway, that's called Operation Overlord. And they decided that in putting this into play, first of all, everything's very top secret, but they also decided that they were going to try a couple rehearsals, because remember, rehearsal good, no rehearsal bad. So they found a place in England called Slapton Sands, and this place in England looks a lot like the Normandy coast. It's on the south side of England, and it used to be like a vacation spot. And so the government basically roped off this entire part of England, told all the people who live there, sorry, we're going to have to borrow your houses for about 90 days. You can move back 90 days from now. We can't tell you why we need your house, but you all have to move. So all these people moved out. Now, they built things on the beach so that they would look like the German beach obstacles. And then they had the Allies go out and practice organizing out at sea, moving in toward the shore, jumping into their landing crafts, hitting the beach, unloading all of their stuff. And they did all this with live ammunition. So people's houses got shot up. I mean, they bombed these places. The Air Force came in and bombed them. The Navy shelled the beach, and then they sent in the troops. They did this several times. And so when the British finally came back to their houses 90 days later, I'm sure they were very upset about the fact that the Allies did more damage to their houses than the Germans ever did. Anyway, this was called Operation Tiger. And I didn't know anything about this until one day I was sitting in the airport, Gatwick Airport in London, in 1988. I was still in college, just getting out of college, actually. And I was waiting for a flight back to the United States. And there was an older gentleman sitting next to me reading the paper, and they were talking about a tank, a United States Army tank they had found off the beach at Slapton Sands. And they had hooked some cables to it and dragged this thing out of the ocean up onto the beach. And I asked him, I said, I'm sorry, I couldn't help but note the front page story there about the tank. And he gave me a long story about, oh yes, the whole history of it. This is Slapton Sands. We did a rehearsal for D-Day. And I said, you said we, were you there? And he said, yeah, I was part of the RAF, the Royal Air Force. And I took part in D-Day. And I remember when they did all these rehearsals. And the rehearsal went horribly wrong. I said, why? He said, well, the Germans found out we were rehearsing, and they just showed up in the middle of the rehearsal with torpedo boats. Killed about 300 Americans. I said, I did not know about this. Years later, when I was talking to Mr. Sneath, he said, yeah, I was there. He was in one of those boats. He watched one of the other ships explode and sink, and he thought, this is not part of the training. Something's gone horribly wrong. And he was right. Anyway, several hundred Americans died, and General Eisenhower basically said, you know what, let's just not talk about this until the war's over, and then we can tell everybody what happened. So every American soldier who died in that, basically their family got a telegram saying that they'd been killed in action. But the reality is they were killed in rehearsal. Sad but true. Anyway, if you look at the slides, I think the last slide there is a picture of that tank. It's a museum piece now. It's set up near the beach as a memorial for all the soldiers who died. The actual tank I'm talking about is in the slide. PowerPoint slides, right? So anyway, this buildup was pretty massive. Everybody was ready to go. And next week when we get together, we'll talk about the actual invasion. Mr. Burgett from Howell, he was also there, training and getting ready to go. So if you watch the Band of Brothers piece, the first episode, it's all about that. Okay, I'm at 12 minutes, so I'm going to stop. I'll see you guys next week. Bye.